It's a Sunday morning in 1577, and a storm of uncommon violence is tearing through the Suffolk market town of Bungay. The sky is pitch black, broken only by flashes of lightning that seem to set the very air on fire. Inside St. Mary's Church, the parishioners are huddled in prayer, as if begging the Lord to keep them safe from whatever horrors might be gathering outside. But it seems that on this day their pleas have fallen on deaf ears, for suddenly a loud crash echoes through the church, the doors burst open, and in from the ominous gloom lopes a calf-sized hound of hell that moves swiftly through the terrified congregation, leaving death and injury in its wake. Its eyes are like burning coals, its paws pad heavily across the stone floor. This is Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, and this is his story. For centuries, nighttime wayfarers traversing the dark, deserted lanes of Essex, Suffolk, Norfolk and Cambridgeshire have whispered in hushed tones of chilling encounters with a baleful hound, the countenance of which can strike terror into even the most fearless amongst them. In his book Highways and Byways in East Anglia, published in 1901, William A. Dutt had this to say about the fearsome creature that, he told his readers, revels in the roaring of the waves and loves to raise his awful voice above the howling of the gale. He prowls along dark lanes and lonesome field footpaths, where, although his howling makes the hearer's blood run cold, his footfalls make no sound. You may know him at once should you see him by his fiery eye, for he has but one, and that, like the Cyclops's, is in the middle of his head. But such an encounter might bring you the worst of luck. It is even said that to meet him is to be warned that your death will occur before the end of the year. So you do well to shut your eyes if you hear him howling. Shut them even if you are uncertain whether it is the dog fiend or the voice of the wind you hear. Over the centuries, the devil hound has acquired several names, Black Shuck, Old Shuck, and Shuck the dog fiend being just three of them. And to understand why this creature is still said to haunt the lanes of this mysterious region today, we have to look at the name itself, a name that, depending on which source you consult, could have several derivations, one of which has a direct link to the devil. The name Shuck is believed by some to derive from the Old English word shucker, meaning devil or fiend. However, the Reverend E.S. Taylor, writing about the demon hound in the journal Notes and Queries in 1850, informed his readers that the name appears to be a corruption of shag, as shucky is the Norfolk dialect for shaggy. As you can see, there is no real agreement over the origins of the name. The truth is, nobody is entirely certain where it comes from. It is also difficult to ascertain exactly what the phantom canine actually looks like, as descriptions of him or it tend to vary. Whereas in some accounts he is possessed of two glowing red eyes, others, such as William Dutt, maintain that he has just one eye. Some descriptions hold that he is headless, others have him as a massive beast the size of a calf. According to some witnesses, his paws make no sound as he trots along the country lanes, whereas others recount that he pads heavily. Equally, it is difficult to pinpoint exactly when the phantom hound became known as Black Shuck. Although there are several accounts of black dogs terrorising the night lanes of East Anglia, no name is actually given to any of them prior to the 19th century. One of the earliest accounts of such a beast, or to be precise, several of them in these parts, is found in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle under the year 1127. Henry of Poitou, a somewhat rapacious individual, had been appointed abbot of Peterborough Abbey. Since his only qualification for the post appears to have been the fact he was related to King Henry II, his appointment was frowned upon by the monks of the abbey. To say he was unpopular would be an understatement. He was positively loathed, and the Chronicle did not mince its words in summing up his tenure, stating boldly that He did nothing good there and left nothing good there. According to the chronicler, even the start of the new abbot's time there was marked by a particularly terrifying portent. Let it not be thought remarkable, the truth of what we say, because it was fully known over all the land that immediately after he came there, many men saw and heard many huntsmen hunting. The huntsmen were black and huge and loathsome, and their hounds all black and wide-eyed and loathsome, and they rode on black horses and on black billy-goats. This was seen and heard from when he came there all that Lent-tide right up to Easter. This was his entrance. Of his exit we cannot yet say. May God provide. Although the account notes that the huntsmen were accompanied by hounds, all black and wide-eyed and loathsome, it does not refer to any of the dogs as shook. One can't help suspecting that the whole story may have been dreamt up or at least exaggerated simply to discredit a particularly unpopular abbot. For nearly 4 centuries after that loathsome hunt in Peterborough, the black dog vanished into the shadows of oral tradition. Then, on the 4th of August 1577, he returned with a vengeance. This, perhaps his most famous appearance, took place in St Mary's Church, Bungay, during the ferocious thunderstorm with which this video opened, and although the event is often reported as being an appearance by Black Shuck, it should be noted that the pamphlet from which the account is drawn does not refer to the dog by that name. The pamphlet in question was published in London later that year by Abraham Flemming, and even today his account of the phantom dog's appearance can still elicit cold shivers, despite being couched in the turgid terminology of the age in which it was written. He began by informing his readers of a strange and terrible wonder wrought very late in the parish church of Bungay, a town of no great distance from the city of Norwich, namely the 4th of this August, in the year of our Lord 1577, in a great tempest of violent rain, lightning and thunder, the like whereof hath been seldom seen, with the appearance of an horrible shaped thing. According to his subsequent account, the storm began between 9 and 10 o'clock on that Sunday morning, and was so violent that it made people perplexed in mind and at their wits' end. As the parishioners trembled in terror inside their church, fearful flashes of lightning and terrible cracks of thunder raged outside. These, Flemming continued, came with such unwonted force and power that the church itself did, as it were, quake and stagger, striking into the hearts of those present such a sore and sudden fear that they were in a manner robbed of their right wit. Suddenly, a huge black dog, or as Flemming put it, the devil in such a likeness, came trotting into the church. This, coupled with the fearful flashes of fire, convinced the terrified worshippers that doomsday was already come. Flemming wrote that the creature then raced through the church with incredible speed, weaving between terrified worshippers. Then, in an instant, it passed between 2 people who were kneeling in prayer and snapped both of their necks backwards at the exact same moment. The pair died where they knelt. But the horror didn't end there. The black dog continued through the church and attacked another member of the congregation, gripping him by the back with such terrible force that his body twisted and shrank in on itself as if it were a piece of leather scorched in a hot fire, or as the mouth of a purse or bag drawn together with string. Miraculously, the man survived, though witnesses said he was left horribly disfigured. And then the story became even stranger. Despite the violent thunderstorm raging outside, the church clerk decided this was the ideal moment to climb a ladder to clean the gutters, apparently ignoring the obvious danger of being high above the ground during a lightning storm. At that exact moment, a massive clap of thunder struck him, and he was thrown violently from the ladder. Yet unbelievably, he escaped without serious injury. Flemming concluded by assuring his readers that they didn't just have to take his word for what had happened in the church that day. Indeed, physical evidence of the creature's awful visitation had been left on the very fabric of the building itself, in the form of the dog's claw marks that could still be seen gouged into the church door and carved into the stone walls. As we'll see, scorch marks, which are claimed to be those left behind by the dreadful creature, are indeed still visible on a pair of old church doors, albeit the doors in question are not those of St. Mary's, but of another church, located a good 7 miles from Bungay. Having given details of the dog's appearance in St. Mary's Church, Flemming tells us that, on the self-same day, the beast also burst into the parish church of Blythburgh. There, placing himself on a main beam of the building, he proceeded to swing down through the church, and there also, as before, slew 2 men and a lad, and burned the hand of another person that was there among the rest of the company, of who divers were blasted. This mischief thus wrought, he flew with wonderful force, to not little fear of the assembly, out of the church in a hideous and hellish likeness. Flemming ends his pamphlet with the reassurance, "These things are reported to be true." The pamphlet in its entirety can be read in a manuscript held by the British Library that has been put online, and I'll place a link to it in the description for those of you who wish to read the full account. Although Flemming claims that it was the doors of St. Mary's Church that bore the claw marks left behind by the dog, it is in fact the doors of Blythburgh Church that show evidence of this long-ago visitation. Now, it takes around 20 minutes to travel by road from Bungay to Blythburgh, but since we are inhabiting a virtual ethereal world, we can fly on the wings of the storm, as it were, and make that same journey in mere seconds. And before you can say, a strange and terrible wonder wrought very late in the parish church of Bungay, here we are outside Holy Trinity Church in Blythburgh. I have to say the village sign of Blythburgh is pretty darn spooky, to the point of being outright terrifying. But Holy Trinity Church itself is truly magnificent, and is, not undeservedly, often referred to as the Cathedral of the Marshes. Stepping inside, we are confronted with as lofty an interior as you could ever wish to find inside a church. At first glance, there doesn't seem to be anything particularly amiss about the south doors, other than that they look very ancient indeed. But look closely, and suddenly you become aware of scorch marks etched into the wood. These are said to be the very claw or talon marks left behind by the dog on the day of his fearful visitation. Now, you've probably noticed that Flemming makes no mention of the dog having left any claw marks on the door of Blythburgh Church. In fact, he is emphatic that the claw marks were left on the door of St. Mary's Church in Bungay. But a tradition has grown up that the marks on the door of Blythburgh Church were the ones left behind by the devil Hound as he fled the scene of his crime. As the notice next to the door inside Holy Trinity Church so eloquently puts it, they are scorch marks, which imaginative folk attribute to Black Shuck's flaming claw marks, scorched into the woodwork as he made his desperate escape. Although Flemming's account is often reproduced without question concerning this 1577 appearance by a dog that successive authors have identified as Black Shuck, I should point out that Flemming was not an eyewitness to these events, and appears to have been merely reporting what had been recounted to him by a third unnamed party. You will also notice, if you read the full transcript of the Strange and Terrible Wonder, that it is couched in fire and brimstone religious terms. Flemming was a God-fearing Protestant who 11 years after the publication of the pamphlet would be ordained as a clergyman, so there is a possibility, some might even say probability, that he might well have invented the dog's appearance for the Strange and Terrible Wonder pamphlet. Interestingly, Holinshed's Chronicle, which was published in that same year and to which Flemming was both a contributor and an editor, mentions the storm, but omits any mention of a black dog appearing during it. The truth is, we'll never know with any degree of certainty what actually happened on that long-ago Sunday in 1577, and some modern scholars suggest, spoil sports that they are, that the injuries wrought inside the two churches were the result of ball lightning as opposed to the claws of a hound of hell. And again, it has to be stressed that, contrary to what you will read in ghost books and guidebooks, Flemming most certainly does not refer to the dog as Black Shuck anywhere in his text, and it is in fact later reports that presume it to have been an appearance by Shuck. In fact, the first mention in print of the black dog, or a black dog, under the name of Shuck didn't actually occur until the 19th century, when an edition of the journal Notes and Queries, dated Saturday, May the 18th, 1850, published a brief article attributed to the Reverend E. S. Taylor. Shuck, the dog fiend. This phantom I have heard many persons in East Norfolk and even in Cambridgeshire describe as having seen as a black shaggy dog with fiery eyes and of immense size, and who visits churchyards at midnight. One witness nearly fainted away at seeing it, and on bringing his neighbours to see the place where he saw it, he found a large spot as if gunpowder had been exploded there. Thereafter, Black Shuck, or at least mentions of him, began to crop up regularly in the newspapers in the latter half of the 19th century, with the consequence that, as the 20th century was ushered in, the name Black Shuck had become a major fixture in East Anglian folklore. And, if local tradition is to be believed, the demon dog's baleful reach even influenced one of detective fiction's greatest and most chilling creations. In 1901, the same year William Dutt published his account of Black Shuck, Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, having returned from the Boer War, took a recuperative golfing holiday in Cromer in Norfolk with his friend, the journalist Bertram Fletcher Robinson. Now, it is often stated as fact that it was the stories of Black Shuck that gave Conan Doyle the idea for the Hound of the Baskervilles, and it is almost certain that Doyle would have heard the legends of the demon dog during the course of his holiday. There can also be no doubt that the idea for the Hound of the Baskervilles came to him on this trip. However, as is often the case, local tradition is not a particularly reliable source. During their visit, Doyle and Fletcher were invited to dine at Cromer Hall by the then owner, Benjamin Cabell. Over dinner, Cabell regaled his guests with the story of his ancestor, Richard Cabell, who had owned Brook Manor in Buckfastleigh in Devon. According to the family tradition, Richard Cabell's wife had been unfaithful to him, causing him to attack her in a jealous rage. She fled out onto the wilds of Dartmoor, but the evil squire pursued her and stabbed her to death. However, his wife's faithful dog attacked him as he was committing the murder, tearing out his throat. From then on, their host told his enraptured guests, the Hound was said to haunt Dartmoor and would reappear to each generation of the Cabell family. It was undoubtedly this story that inspired Doyle's creation of the Hound of the Baskervilles, albeit it is not beyond the bounds of possibility that tales of Black Shuck also played a part in its invention. There is also a tradition that the coachman who took Doyle and Robinson to Cromer Hall was named Baskerville, although I must say that I've also heard this same claim about the coachman who took Doyle and Robinson around Dartmoor during their subsequent research trip to Devon, where of course Doyle based Baskerville Hall on the main storyline of the Hound of the Baskervilles. What cannot be denied, however, is that Cromer Hall bears a striking resemblance to Doyle's description of Baskerville Hall in the book. And since it is a matter of fact that the idea for the story came to Doyle whilst visiting Cromer, there is justification in the claim that Norfolk was certainly the birthplace of the Hound of the Baskervilles, even though Black Shuck himself may not have been the direct inspiration. Black Shuck, however, is famous enough in his own right without the necessity of being linked to crime fiction's best-known detective, and sightings of the beast have continued right down to modern times. A famous spate of sightings of him occurred in 1929, when newspapers across the country published reports of some disturbing appearances, the following version being taken from the Sunday Express of the 17th of November, 1929. Police hunt for a phantom. Mystery of a bear with a dog's bark. A black bear with red eyes and a bark is alleged to have been roaming the woods here. Among its reported activities are looking over a hedge at two sober men driving horses, chasing two other men, equally sober, across a ploughed field, fighting, defeating and eating one sober tabby cat. It was apparently broad daylight about noon when the bear was first seen. The police were informed and statements were taken. A search was made of the woods without result, and the police decided that the case was of no importance. Since then, however, things have developed. 2 men who were chased across a plough field at midnight are positive that it was a bear that followed them, because although it growled like a dog, it was larger than any known breed of dog. Students of Norfolk folklore believe that the bear is a reappearance of Black Shuck, an enormous ghostly hound which is said to haunt many districts in Norfolk, Suffolk and Cambridgeshire. Black Shuck is said to be as big as a calf with eyes like saucers. Some years ago he was said to have chased a young woman near the famous Wicken Fen in Cambridgeshire. In 1961, Norfolk resident Tom Starling was interviewed by BBC East about his encounter with the dreaded black dog. "What a wonderful night it was. I always remember the moon was at its fullest. In fact, I'd never seen such a beautiful night, and as I was pushing the old bike, I hear these rattling of these chains, and I thought to myself, well, that's nothing, that's just a matter of a horse straying off the marshes. But they kept coming nearer and nearer, and I thought to myself, well, I'd better stop here and let it pass. And it passed me as the form of a great big shaggy dog. And you know what? There was a gate dead opposite, and it passed through this gate. But when I got to the gate, that never had been opened, so I said to the villagers the next night when I got there the whole story, and they said, well, that's nothing. That's what they call Old Shuck. He roams these roads pretty frequently. He's been seen many times. But I said I never seen anything like it before." Another potential sighting took place here at Pitsea Mount in 1988, where a forlorn stone tower and an eerie scattering of haphazard graves are all that now remain of the former St. Michael's Church. A group of teenagers playing in the churchyard one dark winter's night were startled when 2 large black dogs with hideous red eyes suddenly appeared out of nowhere, trotted across the hilltop, and then vanished into thin air. The consensus was that they had encountered 2 incarnations of Black Shuck. There can be no doubt about it, Black Shuck's story is a major part of this mysterious time-slippy region, and traces of him are still to be found in many of its shadowy corners. Famously, of course, there are the claw marks etched into the door of Blythburgh Church that visitors can still ponder over and shudder at today. In Bungay, the scene of his strange and terrible appearance in 1577, he looks down on passers-by below from the town's weather vane, as well as being featured prominently on the coat of arms. Each August, the Black Shuck Festival brings visitors here from all over the world to enjoy reenactments, retellings and reproductions of all things Shuck. And perhaps the most terrifying part of the legend of Black Shuck is not the glowing eyes or the ominous growl, but the awful possibility that something is still out there, ever watchful through the hours of darkness. Some say that Shuck is a guardian, others believe he's an omen of death itself, but legends like these don't survive for hundreds of years without a reason. They linger because every so often someone swears they heard panting behind them on an empty road, saw a massive shadow vanish into the fog, or caught a chilling glimpse of 2 burning eyes staring from the darkness before disappearing without a sound. And tonight, as the wind rattles your windows and the world outside falls silent, ask yourself one question. If Black Shuck really is still roaming the countryside, would you even know he was there before it was too late? And so our search for Black Shuck draws to a close. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel. It really does help. Also, if you happen to live in this mysterious region and you have your own tale or tales of Black Shuck, please be sure to share them in the comments section. I'd love to hear your stories and, of course, your theories about Black Shuck. Till we meet again in the twilight world of the paranormal, dear viewer, stay safe, and when you snuggle down beneath the blankets tonight, do have very sweet and pleasant dreams.